everyone, Hamer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm doing Season 4, Episode 19, which is called Phantoms. I love long weekends. I get some extra time to do some reviews. This is great. Okay, so Jim goes back to the firebox on the jungle set for instructions for this one. The mission. Leo Vorka is the aging dictator of a country which is not named, showing signs of senility. He's planning a purge of young artists and agitators with the assistance of his henchman Kull. The IMF must stop the two and make sure the deputy leader Bartzin gains power. For this one, we see guest agents actress Nora Bennett and international reporter Edmund Moore. In the apartment scene, we see that the IMF will use some spookery that works with special glasses, and that Nora will act as Vorka's old love, Lisa Ruger, who Vorka had killed, and that they had a son who disappeared mysteriously. Another key will be the prominent poet Stefan Zara. So Vorka talks to Kull about why he hasn't started the purge yet. Kull says he's having difficulty getting a confession from Stefan Zara, who has fainting spells due to a heart defect. That's going to be key in legitimizing the purge. Paris calls a file office using Kull's voice and ends up gaining access to microfilm records, making some modifications to some of the pictures to include pictures of Jim and himself. Meanwhile, the IMF sets up at a warehouse as usual. Edmund Moore arrives with Barney in tow for an interview with Vorka, who is persuaded to remove his glasses to reduce reflection, hands them to Barney for a moment. The interview basically becomes a PR and propaganda tool for Vorka, but that's not really important. Barney takes the opportunity to replace the glasses, as well as a clock and a book on Vorka's shelf, which contains a projector camera. Vorka regards the glasses oddly for a second, but nothing becomes of it. Jim arrives at Vorka's office as a historian writing a book about Vorka's current favorite topic, his revolution. Vorka invites him to stay and work in his office and shows him a picture of his rival Sarni, which the agitated Vorka quickly tears up in anger. He also mentions Lisa Ruger, and that Sarni murdered her, to which Vorka vehemently agrees, and that there was a boy with them who was likely Vorka's son, who he searched for extensively. And Jim urges him to make that known to his people. The IMF then projects an image of Nora in Lisa's image, but takes it away after a few moments. Vorka asks Jim to leave for a bit, and then the image comes back, this time with Lisa speaking to Vorka, telling him that Zara is his son, raised in the state orphanage, and tells him to spare his life. Jim returns as Vorka starts screaming, and the IMF takes the image away as Vorka orders the room to be searched. So Jim removes the book with the camera and projector for now. Vorka gets Kull to confirm the details about Zara, which check out. Vorka tells him to find the laborer who brought him to the orphanage. Jim returns to talk to Vorka and mentioned his son, causing Lisa to appear again briefly. The laborer turns out to be Paris, styled as an old man who was brought to the office. Paris puts on an act about remembering the details, including the fact that the boy had a weak heart and his mother was killed shortly after he saw them. Paris gives Jim a nod as he leaves. Kull is incredulous as Vorka asks Stefan to be brought to him, but obeys orders. And Paris tells Barney what's going on, who detours the driver towards Officer Willie. Willie commandeers a car, takes it to the warehouse, where Paris makes a mask of Stefan, who stays with the IMF, as Willie takes Paris as Stefan to Vorka's office. The two of them are left alone. Stefan shows only contempt for Vorka and throws the truth in his face. Sarni was the only father he knew, and both he and Lisa were butchered as part of Vorka's quest for power. Vorka slaps him, and Paris as Stefan falls to the floor in a brief fit and dies. Lisa appears accusingly, and then a projection of Stefan, rising from his dead body, appears, standing next to his mother, pointing fingers at Vorka, who starts shooting at the figures that only he can see. Kull and the deputy arrive with other officers, and it's evident to everyone that Vorka has completely lost touch with reality. So he is taken away for rest, and Bartzin says he's now the premier. Tells Kull he couldn't possibly separate Kull from Vorka, so off goes Kull as well. Mission accomplished. This is an episode on which I am going to do a massive about face. I originally had this episode right down in the absolute dumps, and I was completely prepared to give this one an F or at the best a D-. I am going to completely change that and I'm going to tell you why. What I originally put as my brief review when I was thinking about the episodes and kind of going through them briefly, I think I completely glossed over this one. Because what I wrote originally was this. I really, really like Michael Baselion, who plays Cull here. This is what I wrote, as part of the Am I Guest cast. But this one is just bad in so many ways, and he doesn't do anything to help. It's not his fault, just reality, as he really has nothing to do with the main plot at all. Luther Adler as Vorka unfortunately falls into the same category as Edmund O'Brien in The Counterfeiter. He was not physically up to the part by his own admission, and his character never advances past the level of senile schmuck. Ghosts and holograms abound to convince Vorka that he has seen and killed his own son, and that's always a hallmark of lazy writing. Holograms in the remake series is much better structured plot-wise. So I wrote. And based on that, I went into this, as I said, prepared to give this an F. I'm not going to give it an F, not even close. I'm going to give this one a grade of C. Because on review and watching it objectively, I found a lot of good things to say about it. So I'm really, really going to temper what I said originally. There's some things in there that I'm going to stick by, and I'll go through it with you here. First of all, the holograms are not as bad as I remember. I think I was just kind of in this mindset that whenever you see, you know, holograms and projections and ghosts and spookery, that just, like, I just, you know, prejudicially, I'm going to call it that, prejudicially said, okay, this is going to be a bad episode because that's just lazy writing. That's really not fair to say for this episode, and I completely retract that. It's not that bad. It's not overused. I would say that that you know, plot device, that trope, is used strategically and properly, and it actually looks pretty good. That final scene where, you know, Vorka is alone with Paris as Stefan Zara is really well done. And, you know, despite this being a show from the late 1960s, you know, visually, I'm watching it and I say, oh my gosh, it really looks, you know, the effect of Stefan rising from his body is actually really well done, and it looks really good. Not only that, but that last scene is quite entertaining. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. I liked, you know, the emotion that Paris and Stefan was able to portray in that scene, and even what Vorka was able to portray in that scene. Luther Adler as Vorka. Moving on, also good. Luther Adler's difficulties, he did have them. It's documented in the Mission Impossible dossier where, you know, because of his age, he had some difficulty. You know, he really couldn't do long sessions and things like that. But frankly, if I hadn't known that, it's not really evident in this episode. It really isn't. He's animated. I think he shows the correct level of, you know, of being spooked. You know, and his mannerisms, I think, are very, very appropriate and entertaining. I think he actually does a really, really fine job in this one. Also good. Antoinette Bauer as the guest agent. She's reasonable. She doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to do other than be made up a little bit and, you know, and be a hologram. But she's fine. Also, you know, the teamwork is quite reasonable in this one. Even Willie has a fair bit to do, so I don't really have a problem with that as well. A very important thing that really changed my mind about the grade for this episode is that I can actually see this being what I like, which is an end-in-mind plot. And what I mean by that is, you know, for the mission to be successful, Jim Phelps, through the writing team, of course, figures out that the IMF, you know, in order to accomplish this mission and get Vorka out of the picture, he's gonna have to set things up and engineer a situation where the throng of people, not just one person, not just a few people, but a bunch of different people, see Vorka in his office talking about invisible ghosts and, hey, don't you see it? Come on, come on, you must see it, right? All of that. And then they work backwards. Okay, how do we get him there? Right? I can totally see that. And that, as I've mentioned many, many times, and I have to stick by it, that's a sign of a decent plot. And that's why this episode is certainly not even close to being as bad as I originally thought it was. There are some things that aren't quite so good. This episode does suffer a fair bit from having a bit of a predictable plot right from the apartment scene. It becomes obvious, who the players are going to be, what Nora's role is going to be, how they're going to use Stefan Zara, I think becomes pretty evident pretty quickly. This episode also suffers, I would say, from the perfect knowledge flaw that I mentioned in the previous episode about how the IMF just seems, steps ahead of these guys. They know about Vorka's prescription glasses. They know about his clock and are able to make an exact duplicate of it. That sort of thing, right? About the book, yeah, I can imagine that, Vorka's books have been published, and that probably wouldn't be too difficult to duplicate. But, those two things seem a little bit far-fetched and a little bit over the edge in terms of the amount of knowledge that the IMF has about this going in. About Vorka's schmuckery. I think he does suffer from some lame schmuckery. Some of it is forgivable from a character standpoint. He is very, very suitably fooled, I think. And it's not just abject schmuckery as we've seen in quite a few episodes, or abject lameness, where somebody is just so completely dumb or just, so drinking their own Kool-Aid, so to speak, that it just becomes so easy to fool them. I think that the IMF does a good job here, and it's suitable for the plot. It's not over the top. And, again, despite Luther Adler's difficulty, despite Vorka as a character, his difficulties, it's fine. I can't really call it out as being too bad, but, we're talking about a villain who's certainly not the sharpest knife in the drawer. That's for sure. Also, speaking of Michael Baselian, which is the first thing that I mentioned when I did my original thought some 4 or 5 years ago, who plays Yorgi Kull, I really like Michael Baselian. He becomes a very, very frequent guest star. I think he's in at least one every season. I'm 90% sure he's in the last season, but I can't place exactly which episode that is. I could be completely wrong about that. I think he's a really, really good fit for the show. And I think that, for some reason, I think I got him confused with the character of the deputy premier, Bartzen. I remembered that there was a character who was supposed to be important and really didn't get any screen time almost until the very end. And that turns out to be Bartzen, not Kull. So my original statement that, Michael Baselian didn't do much in this episode, that's really not fair. I would rather say that it's a little bit of a kind of a waste of his character. I wish that he had done more, because, the more he does on the show, the better an episode tends to be. He's one of those guest stars. Final note. There is an episode in the revival, and it's called Holograms. And it's not an exact copy of this script, but there are a lot of similarities. The basic elements of the plot are almost identical in many, many ways. So, and comparing the two, again, my original thought is that the plot of Holograms is way better than this episode, than the plot of this episode. I'm going to take that back a little bit. I'm going to walk that back. I would say that they're probably right on par in terms of the plot. Obviously, Holograms was made in 1988. There's better effects and, better, production value and that sort of thing. And so that's why I would probably say that overall, that is a better episode than this one. But in terms of the plot, I would say they're right there with each other. So for the first time, I'm really, 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 taking a complete turn on an episode. And it took until season 4 for that to happen. I don't think it's going to happen a whole heck of a lot more. So don't expect that. But I try to be fair. I try to be objective. And just because I don't like an episode doesn't mean I can't be objective about it. Anyway, that's my review for this one. Thank you as always for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.